All of a sudden, there was this swirling vortex in my head. And the next thing, I saw myself sucked into this tunnel. And I didn't know at the time I dropped my tea. So I had tea all over me. And I was very in a strange, very position. I was horizontal, feet first, going through this tunnel very rapidly, and I could see light at the end of the tunnel. And immediately, I'd heard the stories about the light and the tunnel and so forth. And my first thought was, did I just die? What did I die of? I wasn't sick. And the thoughts are so fast, so fleeting. I immediately just kind of push that away because of the thought is, well, if I died, there's nothing I can do about it now. So let's just go and see what this everybody's been talking about is.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel within. I'm Mira, and today I'm so excited to be speaking with Dr. Kathy Forti about her NDE, about remote viewing, and many other spiritual topics. Hi, Dr. Forti, and thank you so much for being here with me
Hi,
today.
thank you, Mira, for inviting me. We finally did it, right?
I know, I'm so excited. And do you mind talking about the NDE, maybe life before that, to give us some context about your religious and or spiritual background?
Well, I my NDE was in 23 years ago in 2003, and I'll speak about that in a minute. But yeah, I was raised Catholic, but I just I was a lapsed Catholic. Wasn't quite buying all of it, and so embrace spirituality, but there was a lot of subjects I didn't really know anything about. I wasn't actively involved in researching that area. And, I did go through, I got my PhD in clinical psychology, and I was practicing in Los Angeles at the time. I live in Maui now, so that was many years ago. And yeah, 23 years ago, hard to believe. And actually, 23 years ago this month.
Wow.
So we're approaching it very soon. Anyway, I had a last client of the day. It was an evening client, and she happened to be a Buddhist nun. And she, before our session ended, she goes, this is a special day. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, it's the night of the Wesak moon, which is a sacred moon for all Buddhists. It marks the day of Gautama Buddha was born, had his enlightenment, and died on a Wesak moon. And it usually happens in May. And actually this month let's see, it appears on, I think I wrote it down, the 31st. It's a blue moon, and it's which means it's the second moon of the month, second full moon, and of course it's a full moon. And she said, I said, well, what does that mean? She goes, well, besides it's sacred, all the veils, and she said it's a lunar eclipse too on that day. All the veils between the dimensions are thin, and magic can happen. And I just thought, oh, that's really nice, you know. And so as I left for the day, I was walking to the parking lot to get my car. And all of a sudden, I had this strange, like whoosh feeling right out of my solar plexus. And immediately I felt empty. Empty in the sense that it felt like I had lost all my friends. I mean, it was a very, very strange feeling. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And my thought was, feeling this empty, I can't go on the rest of my life feeling this empty. Am I getting ready to die? And then I pushed that thought away. And so I got in the car. I was able to drive, obviously, and went home and I got some tea and I was sitting on my couch thinking about what this strange feeling I was feeling was. And then all of a sudden, there was this swirling vortex in my head. And the next thing, I saw myself sucked into this tunnel. And I didn't know at the time I dropped my tea. So I had tea all over me. And I was very in a strange, very position. I was horizontal, feet first, going through this tunnel very rapidly, and I could see light at the end of the tunnel. And immediately, I'd heard the stories about the light and the tunnel and so forth. And my first thought was, did I just die? What did I die of? I wasn't sick. And the thoughts are so fast, so fleeting. I immediately just kind of push that away because the thought is, well, if I died, there's nothing I can do about it now. So let's just go and see what this everybody's been talking about is. But before I could go into the light, I was stopped. And I was just hovering there, like feet first, and very, like I said, strange. I've never heard anybody who's gone through the tunnel. Maybe they have, they just haven't noticed. It was like some type of fast conveyor belt or something. And I tried to will myself to go into this light, and I couldn't budge. And I had the very irreverent thought, well, this is boring. And with that thought, all of this energy poured into me like an implosion. And I was spun back around very fast and went back through the tunnel just as fast as I had traveled. The next thing, I found myself back in my physical body and I couldn't move. And of course, I was alone, and my whole left side was paralyzed. I couldn't feel the connection to it or anything. And then I started hearing these voices in my head that said, breathe, Kathy, breathe. And I realized without being told that somehow my heart had stopped, and these voices were trying to get me to breathe back into my physical body. And since there was nothing else I could do, I just listened to what they said. They were saying, relax, relax, everything will be okay. And as they were doing that, I could hear in my head clicks on the left side of my body as it was coming back online, and I was reconnecting to it. And suddenly I felt connected again. But I felt this pressure in my heart area. And I remember thinking, now I'm going to have to see a cardiologist. Did I do some type of damage in this experience? And the voices in my head basically said, you don't need to see a doctor. You'll be okay. If I skipped ahead many years later, since I never did go to a cardiologist, but when I got COVID and I was wheezing, a couple of years ago, I decided to see a cardiologist. And he said, and I never said anything about the near death experience. He says, I can't understand why there's scarring on the left side of your heart. And so that was like a physical thing that somehow I had died, but come back, but there was no outward appearance of it, but my heart still had it. And I've never had any problems with my heart since. I mean, I'm very active, just like the voices said, no, you're going to be okay. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I still didn't tell the doctor what had happened because he didn't look like the type that would really kind of go along with, with what I was saying. So anyway, after I got back to my physical body and connected again, I went to work the next day, and I was feeling all of my clients' emotions, their anger, their disappointment. I mean, it was pretty profound, and it didn't feel very good. And I didn't really know how to filter or protect myself. But that was going on for a couple of days, and every night I'd wake up between 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning with all of these thoughts about the universe, about energy, about quantum physics, about math, about everything going through my head. And I couldn't get back to sleep. I was being prompted to go to my computer and research what I was hearing, or hearing, because I wasn't seeing it. I was hearing all this stuff. And of course, I always joke that when you're a psychologist and you start hearing voices, you start really worrying. But, you start to think that, they're hallucinations or delusional world or something. And of course, maybe they need a med check, how bad it is.
Sure.
But, I knew this wasn't right. So I contacted a friend of mine who I'd used in therapy sessions before with the client's permission, and I'd always ask him if he could take a look behind the scenes with the client. If it was a difficult client and I just was stuck on really helping them, all he needed was their permission and their name. He didn't want to know anything about their psychopathology or their circumstances or anything. So it was a clean read. And I said, can you take a look at what's going on with me? And he was quiet for quite a while, and which concerned me. And then he finally came back and he goes, well, you almost died. And he said, but you have all your old guides left, which was that whoosh, out of my solar plexus. He says, you have a whole new set of guides. They're very technologically oriented. He used the word, he says, kind of geeky. And the first thing I said, what do they want? And he says, well, it looks like it was kind of some type of life contract. You could have kept going, but you, on some level, you made the decision to come back and do this because no one's forced to ever do anything. It's something you've done before. And he said, you're going to invent some type of technology. And I kind of laughed. I don't know anything about inventing and electronics or anything like that. And he goes, now he said, they're showing me that you will be led to the right information or the people that will help you. And he said, it's kind of a new way of thinking about healing. And he didn't go into great detail or anything, but he said, yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting, and that's what they're telling me. And I thought, oh, he's finally wrong. His batting average had been really good up until then, and his with his advice, I was able to really help super difficult clients because I had a clientele that was a lot of them were dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality. So I had a very difficult clientele. I mean, I had some. The nun was a regular one, but I had some really unusual, difficult clients in there. And so, I kind of pushed it aside, thinking like, okay, he's wrong. But it became, I don't know if any of you, all of you have seen that movie. It's an old movie with Jane Wyman and Rock Hudson called Magnificent Obsession. And it kind of reminded me of that. The more I tried to push it aside, the more it kept, coming to the forefront and knocking at my door. This is something you need to do. And so I didn't know what it was I was supposed to do. But it was something technologically oriented, and I started to get little bits of things coming in. Didn't quite know what to make of it, and things that dealt with mathematics. And I kind of laughed because I'm smart in many ways, but math was not my subject. I did poorly. That math component in my brain was somewhat dormant, or so you might say. So I went to some people that I thought would be helpful in creating this technology. And I every time I tried to do that, it was like all the obstacles hit the, excuse the expression, the shit hit the fan, and at one point I just kind of threw up my hands and I said, I don't know what you want to do. And then I heard as clear as day, we don't want them to do it. We want you to do it. So it was a deep dive in trust. And once I agreed to that, like, okay, well, then tell me what I'm supposed to do. I always took direction pretty well. If somebody had a project to do, they'd always put me in charge because it'd get done. So I guess the universe came calling again and said, okay, we want her to do this. And so over a 5-year process, I developed a technology that was based on not frequency per se, but all mathematical coding. Because what they were trying to tell me, and which I finally got, was that everything in the universe has a mathematical code to it. Our DNA is mathematically coded to it. You need to speak to it in a language it understands, which is math. And so over a number of years, it was like thousands of different substances, emotions, chemicals, so forth like that. I was shown the mathematical algorithm for. So I always use the thing is like instead of taking vitamin C, you can take the mathematical formula for vitamin C, and which is a quicker route in. And I thought, oh my God, this sounds like hocus pocus magic, it's like, who would think this is possible? And, I always bring into the mix is that most people, and it slows down your aging. Now, most people never believe I'm going to be 74 this year.
Wow.
And so I know, this mathematical coding works, but they said, it's not just the math. You need certain types of musical hertz frequencies in there as well, because music is a carrier wave for these mathematical codes. And they also wanted me to include the science of fractals. Up until that point, I didn't know what a fractal was. And, it's sort of like, I always say, it's like those Russian Matryoshka dolls, a doll within a doll within a
Yes.
doll.
Yeah.
It's the exact replica inside. And a fractal image is the same thing. It contains the same the same universe within a universe within a universe. I mean, they told me later that there's we're aware of 12 dimensions, and each of those dimensions that we're currently in are within the other dimensions. So, so I incorporated all that over 5 years' time. I only worked with one programmer. I designed it all, everything that was put into it. I just didn't want to start learning how to software coding, you know. And so it came out, and I don't like to talk about the fact that I'm not doing this to sell, but people always were interested because some people have this wonderful flowery experience on the other side, and they meet Jesus or they meet angels or they meet any. I didn't get any of that, you know. I got an assignment, and and I have jokingly said, to them, how come I didn't get all the wonderful stuff other people get? And they said some people need more convincing than others, and you've already done this many, many times. And so the first time I unveiled the software, which was Trinfinity 8. Later, I went on to do Ascension 11, which was very spiritual oriented program with the same technology. But the Trinfinity 8 was basically for physical problems, emotional problems, some spiritual stuff, a lot of release stuff, and anti-aging. And, I joked that, I must have heard on some level spiritually in the tunnel, well, if you do this, we'll always keep you looking young. And I said, yeah, you got me. I've never had any work done. And so it was, it's just energy. So, to make a long story short, I debuted it in 2009 at the International Study for the Study of Subtle Energy Medicine in California, Northern California. And a lot of the people there could all see energy around people. They were very psychically oriented. It's the first time but I was led, this is where you are going to debut it. And so I put out a couple, computers. And the thing is, I forgot to say that I couldn't understand how am I going to transport these algorithms to the individual. And they showed me, they always go into your brain to see your memory, what they can pull out that will fit. And they showed me a picture of Superman in the Fortress of Solitude, downloading the crystals of the history of his race from the movie Superman. And I said, oh, crystals, and I'm thinking, New Age shop crystals, what? And they said, no, 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 no. These crystals have to be lab grown. They have to be made special because the crystals that you get in store have all these striations and everything else in, and information can get trapped in there. You need something that is crystal clear, which has to be lab grown, so that it can take the information and immediately, if you're holding these crystals in your hand, which is connected to the computer, it will stream through there and immediately the person will get it. So it took me like 6 months to find a lab in the world that would grow these, and it takes a month to grow, and then of course they cut and polish and so forth to specifications. And they're four-sided, some are six-sided crystals and so forth like that. And so I mean, people were coming to my booth thinking like, what is this woman's got with these crystals that are tuned into this transmitter box that are plugged into her computer? What is this? We've never seen anything like this before. And one of the people said, oh, who was it? I forgot his name. He started the organization. He worked for the Menninger Foundation. And they said, he told us that a technology like this would be coming down the pike. And we hadn't seen it yet. And this is it. So they were lined up at the booth. The other vendors weren't very happy about that because I had everybody. And some people were standing back and watching the auric fields of the people on the Trinfinity 8. And so I couldn't see them at the time. So I said, well, what are you seeing? They go, well, this is interesting. We're seeing shards of broken glass coming out of the person. And I looked, and one of the things was detox program. So they were detoxing stuff that to the psychics looked like shard glass. And then they said, oh, now we're seeing this rainbow plumping of different colors, and what was playing was balance energy centers, you know. So it correlated with what the different program I was playing for the person. But the most important one was one guy. He was an ophthalmologist and also a psychic, and he got off the machine and he was crying. And I thought he'd had a bad experience, and I was concerned. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. What was it like?" He goes, "Oh, no, 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 don't apologize." He said, "My own guides came in and knew immediately how to work with this, and to tune my psychic channels much higher so that they'd be much more acute." And he said, "I saw all the guidance behind this device." He said, "Oh, was a whole bunch of light beings." Now they hadn't told me till later that they were from the eighth dimension and beyond. They called themselves the founders, so they'd been around for a while. But at that time, I did not know that. And then this man came forward and he identified himself as your father. Now my father had died about a year after my near-death experience. And so he never got to see this. And he said to the ophthalmologist who had the experience, he said, he just wanted you to know it was money well spent, because my inheritance from my father dying and my mother dying another year after that all went to developing this. So I didn't have to bring in investors and possibly, compromise the integrity of what the codes were and so forth. Because I've had people over the years come to me and, "Oh, can I put this in mine? And can you do this? And can you do that?" And you know what can be used for good can be used for bad too. So, I've kind of stayed off the radar as much as possible. It's not like I'm selling widgets or anything. So it just started to blossom and bloom. I had practitioners all over the country, some even plastic surgeons that were using it to speed up tissue repair after surgeries. I've used it to heal a broken foot, and the doctor was amazed. He said, "I can't believe how fast this foot." So, it's like it speeds up healing. And it deals with a lot of, but I always tell people, it's not curing you. It just gets the gunk out of the way so you can cure yourself. Because any device that says it'll cure you, I'd run from, because only you can cure yourself. But sometimes you need to get, to help your innate healing process go into overdrive. It's sort of like I had one client, she had Parkinson's, tremors. One of my doctors told me this. And in a day's time, her tremors went away. And it freaked her out. She said, "What would I do without my tremors?" And of course, the tremors came back. So sometimes, people need their illness. They're not ready to totally let go of it yet either. One person, talked to a brain tumor, the person, and the brain tumor said, "I'm not ready to dissipate yet until she deals with this particular issue." So it's like I said, I can't take away people's karma, you know. So it just kind of starts spreading all over the world. Different practitioners would use it as an add-on tool, whether it be psychologists, psychiatrists, chiropractors, naturopaths, massage therapists. I've had a whole gamut of people who use it. And then when the Ascension 11 came out, well, you got the same information kind of coming through, but it was all the I am programs to strengthen for your own spiritual, especially the quest now when we're going through what many call the Ascension times. So, but my guides had said, you need to go back to Egypt. Those are where all your roots are. In fact, that ophthalmologist who saw all that stuff, he said, they're telling me this is Atlantean technology. It's just packaged differently.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he
Yeah.
said, so you've done this before in the past. That was why, they wanted you to do it, because they knew if you dug deep down, they would help kind of, because some of the ideas just came to me that, and people say, how did they come to you? Well, sometimes they would show me pictures. Sometimes I'd hear the words, and sometimes I would just have an all-knowing that
Yeah.
this is what needed to be done. So, it was a lesson in trust, because I didn't tell my friends what was going on during that time. As one door was closing in the therapy field, I was being slowly moved into a different area, the next chapter of my life. and which is kind of scary when you make a big change like that, because your first thing is like, oh, there goes my income. and so you needed to kind of trust in the process that you will be led to what you're supposed to do, and sometimes you just have to go with the flow.
Absolutely. So before we jump to like Egypt or other topics, let's just unpack a little bit. So I did have a question about guides, if they remained with us throughout our lives or even across lifetimes. But you did say that uh, guides left and new ones came in. Um, and you mentioned that they call themselves the founders. So what does that mean and where are they from in terms
Well,
of the galaxy?
um, they didn't say specifically what area of the galaxy. It was sort of like, don't ask stupid questions like what's our name or something like that. That isn't important.
Yes, yes.
We're a team, and we have this information that you will need to guide you in the process. And all I got out of them that was they were from the eighth dimension and beyond, and that they had been here from the beginning of times when souls first started incarnating on what we call this universe or whatever. And some of them have had opted to stay in that kind of form, in spirit form, where some of us decided to take sojourns on, different dimensions or planets or so forth to experience in the physical things to grow, evolve, and come back and share. And so everybody seems to have their job. Even if you don't think you have much of a job here on Earth, you still have a job. Of course, then I think some of us sometimes take a little, a few lifetimes here and there just to have fun.
Sure, sure. Now, did you just hear them or were you able to see them at any point?
I was never able to see them. Now, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I could see them in my mind, but they didn't manifest in front of me. And it was just, very elusive. It wasn't like I saw faces, but I saw energy. And they said, if you wanted to, you really could see all this. But they go on some level, you didn't want to, because as it was after I had the experience, people started to think, oh, you're psychic. Can I come to you? And can you ask me, am I going to meet the man of my life? Am I going to be rich? Am I going to win the lottery? All that stuff. And they said, you weren't really interested in any of that. That wasn't your thing. You're just a messenger. That's all, you know. And so, I've been kind of the caretaker of it. It's still in existence. It's still running fine, but I am kind of moving in a different direction. I've written many books now, which are all channel books, a whole sci-fi series called Stack's Library of Truth, where, somebody goes to the eighth dimension where the Akashic records are, a library of truth. So this library of truth is hidden inside, or at least the portal to it is hidden inside the Library of Congress. And it's been
Wow.
hijacked. So I spent a whole week at the Library of Congress with the librarians getting everything straight, and there's now 4 books out: Library of Stack's Library of Truth, Stack's Awakening Truth, Stack's Truth Will Set You Free, and 20 years later, Stack's Next Generation Truth. If people just Googled my name on Amazon, they'd find all those books in audio, Kindle, and so forth like that. So it was sort of like I incorporated some of my strange stories and experiences in life into those books as well. Instead of writing another nonfiction biography, I wrote Fractals of God, a psychologist, near-death experience and journeys into the mystical, which talks about my near-death experience, some of my unusual experiences. But I thought, I've had ET experiences, I've had remote viewing experiences, I've had a lot of things since that happened. And so I thought, instead of writing that, I was just going to incorporate that into my characters' experiences in this book, in the Stacks Library of Truth books. So yeah, I've had fun with that. I'm really a writer at heart, I discovered. So who knows?
Apparently. So before we jump into those topics, you mentioned that the person seeing the shards of energy, you mentioned at that time that you weren't able to see that at the time. So are you now able to see energy?
A little bit. You
Okay.
know, um, it's I hear things. I'm more clairaudient, you might
Clairaudience?
say,
Yes. Yeah.
than, and so no, but I kind of, without seeing it, I kind of know. It's sort of like, oh, that person's sick, without seeing their auric field. So on some level, I can see it, but not with my my eyes. With second sight, perhaps. But no, once in a while, I'll catch. Especially if it's a dark field, I'll catch that. Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about this remote viewing? How did this all get started?
Well, I found out I was actually good at it, which I didn't know. Many years ago in the 1980s, I went to the very first years of the Monroe Institute near Charlottesville, Virginia. And Robert Monroe had wrote this book, Journeys Out of Body. And Far Journeys, actually, he has one of my experiences in there. It's anonymous, of course, because I was still practicing at the time. So I did know about out of body experiences and a little bit about remote viewing before I had my near death experience. And I was up. I had moved at that time to Northern California, and someone had invited me to a New Year's Eve party where I met Russell Targ. And Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff were, Palo Alto scientists that had worked for the military and remote viewing and everything. And I got to talking with Russell, and we were talking about remote experience. And I said, I had a couple at the Monroe Institute. Bob Monroe would tell us to stay in our units, in our rooms, and he'd put a bunch of items down on a table and to see what our impressions were. And I got two of the objects right because all of a sudden I found a carrot in my hand, in my mind. And I'm thinking, was it a carrot? Oh, that's crazy. I tossed the carrot aside, but I said later, was it a carrot? And they said yes. And I picked up a coin as well. So I picked up the coin and the carrot, not the other stuff. So I was intrigued by this aspect. So Russell said, oh, yeah, I can teach anybody. And so there was a few of us that he did kind of a class for outside of the party, obviously. And he taught us that it was really easy. It was a developed skill. And so after that, I would kind of use it to look out into the universe. That's where I felt. So I'll tell you briefly. I wanted to see what was out in the universe, and I saw something emerge from the sun, and it was like, what is that? And it was a vehicle, a space vehicle. And then I saw another vehicle going into the sun and disappearing. And I realized, oh my gosh, the sun is a portal. And so in my remote state, I hitched a ride on a vehicle that was going in, not knowing what that would be like. And it was like going through a time warp. It was so fast. It was like a horizon, they call it like an event horizon. It was so fast. And as I came out on the other side, the colors were unbelievable. And there was all these kind of spacecraft in a circular pattern. And they were beaming rays at the ships coming through. And immediately I knew that they were decontaminating them from the universe, from the galaxy or universe we had just come from. And when they beamed these lights at the ship, it also identified who was on the ship. And my ship was purple, and always been my favorite color, and and they let them through right away. But they didn't let me through. I was right out there and back to my universe. So I wasn't allowed to see what was in that. But from that moment on, I started thinking, oh my God, the sun is a portal. And then I would find, pictures of Mayan artifacts showing a sun with a spaceship emerging from it. So the ancients knew that the sun was a portal to another dimension. So, I started exploring and things like that. And then this was back, oh God, what year was this? I think it was like 2011 or 12 or something like that. I don't remember now. I went to Dr. Stephen Greer, one of his workshops in the Arizona desert, and it was for a whole week. And it was like 20 people, and we get out at night, like 11 p.m. or something like that, and all on our zero gravity chairs in the middle of the desert with no lights, nothing going on, and meditate. and do remote viewing and try to see the ships or bring in the ships or something like that, you know? And I found myself immediately remote viewing over a U.S. military base. Now, there's a lot of bases in Arizona, but the reason I saw it was because I saw the tail of the ship had an American insignia on, a flag, you know, so I recognized it right away. And I thought, I don't want to be remote viewing over a American military base because I was told that they have remote viewers that can lock onto you as well. And so
Yeah,
in my
it's done in the CIA and all these secret
Yes, yes.
agencies, right?
So
That's
I avoid those things. It's like I don't want to get in trouble there. It's not worth it. So I said to myself, I'd rather know where the ET bases are, and not thinking like anything would happen. And usually that happens with me when I toss something aside and thinking like, okay, just out of fun. That's when it happens. So I heard in my head, look to the artificial mountain. And of course, it's dark as can be. There's no way I could see any artificial mountain or whatever. But I felt my mind drawn to this one area, and there was no visible opening for my eyes to see, but suddenly I was going down in it. And I went down miles into the earth and I saw all of these underground tunnels under there, huge, where you could run, 747, so whatever through, huge. And I was amazed that there was no light, visible light source. It was illuminated by something I didn't understand. And there was no shadows either. And I know people, nothing, no ETs down there. So I'm down in these tunnels, and all of a sudden, this energy is pulling me over to one area of these tunnels. And it was a recessed wall, kind of. And I looked around the corner in my mind's eyes, and I could see all this writing on the wall. Now, it wasn't hieroglyphics. I didn't know if it was cuneiform or ancient Sumerian or ET language. I didn't know what it was, but nothing of it looked familiar from what I'd seen. And of course, I'd seen a lot of hieroglyphics, having been to Egypt and led groups there so many times. And so I kind of moved my consciousness around that wall, and I saw this like 10-foot tall praying mantis sitting on a big, huge pillow, almost as if it looked like it was meditating in their den. And I mean, you never seen anything like this before. And its tentacles were like going off like this. It knew immediately when I came in. It knew the second I was there and that I did not belong there. And I was pushed out right back up through the mountain, back to my body, and I said to Dr. Greer later, I just met a mantis being. And he goes, oh yeah, they're kind of like the teachers of in the universe. And then I heard my guide say, yes, not the full story. I'm sure there's, not to disparage, I'm sure there's good mantis beings out there. But he said, they're the real teachers of those little gray creatures. So the little gray creatures get all the flack. And they sit back. And since then, I've met people who've had abduction experiences, seeing a mantis standing in the corner while the little aliens, gray aliens, are doing some experiment or probing or doing whatever it is they do over you. So that's why I included the mantis beings in my Stack's Library of Truth book. It's sort of like, okay, I'm going to unmask you. You're not as great as people might think. You might be teachers, but yeah, what are you teaching?
sure.
So that was kind of, yeah. So I've seen, yeah, I've seen a lot of things out there.
Dr. Forty, for those who may not be familiar with the term, can you define remote viewing?
Well, it's, some people get it mixed up between out of body, getting out of your body, and sometimes you can have the out of body experience and remote view it as well. But this is like sending your consciousness. Your body is staying here and sending your consciousness to another place, and and not having any investment and trying to stay neutral. That's really a key thing, because if you're going in with a pre notion of what you're going to see, it can really skew things. So you go in, like a baby with no information. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to see. ET bases. I mean, It wasn't quite the ET I would have expected to see. I'd never seen a praying mantis, but I've seen other people since then who have seen mantis beings. And so there's insectoid beings out there in the universe as well. And, here's a psychologist talking about insectoid beings and so forth, and it's sort of like there's so much we don't understand about our world. And, over time, I got to see that it's very likely, I'm almost certain of it, we're living in a simulation reality. So I've caught too many glitches in the software coding system of it. Now, I'm not saying that some people think that we're being ruled by aliens that are in control. I don't necessarily buy that. I think our higher selves have found a way for us to have parallel lifetimes, simultaneous, simulation therapy to work it all out. And so, I don't like to always go to the most nefarious reason out there. It's not to say that there aren't nefarious beings out there. There surely are. Dr. Greer, I never agreed with him when he said all ETs are good. I said that's really naive. It's like saying all human beings are good.
Yes.
Maybe inherently when they're born, but they can do really pretty nasty things.
Yeah.
And, for all different reasons, mainly corruption and power and greed and so forth. And so yeah, it's sort of like there's a lot of things out there that people say is truth, and I'm not buying. You got to go by your own inner truth or
Yeah.
ask inside for your guidance to
And that
point you
makes
towards
sense.
truth.
The duality exists in our realm, so therefore, in all species, we may have that good and bad,
Yeah.
and all the dualities there gonna
This
happen.
simulation thing, I got clued
Oh
onto
yeah,
that.
can you give us an example of a glitch
Yeah,
that,
glitch in the system.
yeah.
Um, I lived during COVID. I lived for 2 years in Prescott, Arizona. I was told I was living in Santa Monica at the time, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and as clear as could be, Kathy, you're getting ready to leave California. And I was like, I love California. Why am I leaving? And I thought, oh, maybe the big one is coming. This was in 2019, and um, and they didn't say what was coming. Actually, it was COVID that was coming. And and I said, well, where am I going? And they said Prescott, Arizona. I'd never been to Prescott, Arizona. So I went and I said, well, listen, I've got an Egypt trip to do. As soon as I get back from there, I'll go take a look see. And so I really liked it, found the exact place I wanted, moved my office and everything there and my office manager. And so I wrote out COVID very easily in Arizona, where it would have been horrific in California. And so I always would go to this one place on Lynx Lake. It was a German cafe, pancake house, and and it was, overlooked the lake. And I used to kayak on that lake and all through COVID and so forth like that. And I'd always get their hot chai tea latte. I love chai tea latte. I'd always get that, and every time I went there, and with one of my friends. And so after I moved and I went back to visit my friend, we went to this cafe. And so this was at the end of COVID, or yes, I had already been living in Maui, and I ordered the chai tea latte, the hot chai tea, and the waiter said to me, I'm sorry, we don't have any of that. And I said, oh, are you out of it? And he goes, no, we've never carried hot Thai tea latte. And I thought, oh, maybe he's new. So I knew the owner. I called over the owner and I said, um, uh, when did you stop carrying chai tea latte? And she said, we never ever carried hot chai tea latte here. And I turned to my friend and she looked at me because she's remembered me ordering it there many times. And we started going, do. Did we just jump a timeline? Did we just whatever? And I've seen numerous things like that, but that was the first one that stood out to me that there's no way. I know I always had chai tea latte there.
Yes.
So yeah, somebody made, and if anyone's interested in simulation theory, I'd say contact Rizwan Virk. He wrote the
I've
book.
heard him
Yes,
speak.
and
Amazing.
I've done a week long, well, it wasn't a week long, it was like over 6 weeks or so, a class with him, and it was fascinating. And so it really does make sense. What we see visually, we don't know what's behind it. It may be blank screen because our consciousness creates, it's only what we see. So, it's our friends and I, we look at the world and we kind of, laugh and go, well, yeah, it's just an illusion. It's just a movie. And when my brother died in September, I had a number of friends who are well known in the field for after death communication. And they said, would you like us to see if we can contact him? And I said, sure. And he came through right away. And so I asked him about simulation theory. And he goes, yes, it's not what you think, though. He called it, this is his exact words, he called it a big, beautiful game. And by that beautiful, I meant he thought it was brilliant. And he said, so don't get hopped up on all this, like the politics and all this other stuff happening in the world. He says it's all an illusion. It's not real. The other world is real. And you're just playing it out. So it's just like pass the popcorn, this movie that we're seeing. I also asked him, what is God? I know Veda Austin. And so I said, my brother said God is water. And he said, it's a trinity because it's in three forms. It's liquid, it's solid, and it's gas. And nothing exists without water. Even planets can't come into being without water. It is the beginning of all life, water. And so he said, we're all like droplets of water in this
Oh,
big
that is so
ocean sea.
beautiful. Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of like, thank you, Michael. And, I pass that on to people. I mean, they can take it or leave it. It doesn't, but it makes you think that, once again, what do we know? I go by the thing, I know nothing, and that way I'm open to very curious. I think curiosity keeps you young and to learning new things. Try to learn something new every day. That's what keeps your mind active. And it's like that's why it's hard for me to be around other people in their 70s like me or 80s or whatever, because sometimes they're just too old. They think too old. They're falling apart too old. And they forgot about that child instill in them, because basically we all still think we're 20s,
I
inside.
I heard Sadhguru say that we get old when we stop asking questions, when we stop listening to that inner child. So that totally makes sense. And I really love that analogy that God is water. I really, really love that your brother said that.
Well, to back that up, I mean, when I did all the algorithms for thousands of different substances and things like that, they always told me behind every one of those programs, I should put the pure algorithm for water as well. And, I understood it more as over the years, that, water is just like music. It's a carrier wave for information. And of course, it sustains all life. So yeah, God is water. Who would have thought?
I love it. Um, and since you've been going back to Egypt so many times, what is the fascination with Egypt?
Well, they told me I'd had many lifetimes in Egypt, which were correlated to this lifetime, and that I needed to rediscover my roots. And when I went back there, when I went for the first time, it got canceled because it was the Arab Spring uprising. 2 weeks or so before I was supposed to go, they had the Arab Spring uprising. I kept thinking they couldn't wait a month or so, and everything got canceled, and Egypt got shut down, and tourist industry died there, and people were really suffering. So I had to wait a couple of years to actually go back there, and I went with a group of only 3 people who had already been there. I went in knowing nothing. I didn't read up on anything. I just wanted to absorb, get whatever impressions. And the first time we booked a 2-hour session in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, which you can do. It's usually about $2,000 or so and the people there didn't want to, spend that much because they'd already done it. And I said, listen, I will pay for it. I don't really want to go in there alone because I didn't know what to expect. So there's an empty, what looks like a sarcophagus. There was never a mummy or body or anything used in there, but it's in there. It's not even in the middle of the room. It's kind of off a little bit, so symmetrically doesn't make sense where it's placed in the room as well. And so I just climbed in and I started toning, ohms and so forth like that. And it's a great sound reverberation chamber, as most people have discovered. So I just started doing this naturally. And all of a sudden, in my mind's eye, I saw a lid, and there is no lid in real life on that sarcophagus, that box sarcophagus like thing. And the lid shut on me. And immediately I knew I was entombed in there. And I didn't know I'd had a lifetime where I had been entombed and died, alive. I was buried alive in the tomb. And I heard in my head my guide say to me, "You know what to do." And immediately I slowed down my breathing and I found myself lifting slightly out of my body. So I was, and as soon as that happened, it was like the bottom of the sarcophagus opened into a shaft and there was light going down there. And suddenly I was going down into the pyramid when I thought, oh, I thought I'm supposed to go up. I thought you're supposed to ascend up. Why am I going down? And I saw voids and empty spaces and chambers in the pyramid before they did the Scan the Pyramid project. I always knew that there was a big void above the Grand Gallery. And so when they did that, I said, yeah, I know it. And I said, I saw what looked like a small shaped triangular pyramid shape. And I think the capstone is up there. I think they hid the capstone, which was taken off. I think it was taken off during the time of Akhenaten, the pharaoh Akhenaten, and they hid it in the actual. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised because every time I walked up the grand gallery before you get to the king's chamber or the queen's chamber, my eyes would automatically go to the ceiling and saying something's up there. So I saw that there was something there. And then I was going through the pyramid and I was going down, 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 and I came across water tunnels underneath the Great Pyramid. I had never heard anybody talk about these water tunnels. So I knew they were there. And the next thing I do is I found a kind of a hallway or chute. And the next thing I was doing, I was going through, my body was going through the Sphinx and shot out the top of the head of the Sphinx. I didn't know there actually is a hole at the top of the head of the Sphinx. And just as I was, shooting out the Sphinx, one of the people in my group, he leaned over the sarcophagus and said to me, "Are you done in there yet?" And and immediately came right back into my body. And he was the one that later, he's a psychic from Japan. He said, "You're going to be leading groups here someday." And I go, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know anything about Egypt." Just like I said, I don't know anything about, math or inventing software or anything like that. And so it always nagged me that there was water tunnels underneath the Great Pyramid. So I was determined to find a way to get down there. So working with a trusted guide I developed over the years, we approached the Giza Plateau Antiquities office. And first of all, I wanted to know how I knew about them because they'd been discovered in like 1952 by this Salim Hassan, this archaeologist, but they'd been closed off to the public because it's like 150 feet down from the surface. There's like two different levels of these iron ladders you got to go down, and it would be a logistical liability nightmare if you brought groups down there. And at the bottom is another rung on the third level where there's a water and there's tunnels there. And so they said no at first. We kept going, and then they finally arrived at a price. And it was very doable. I would have paid more, but I didn't tell them that, because of my curiosity. So it was like 4 a.m. in the morning with flashlights. I was the only one with the flashlight. They didn't, and we're walking over the Giza Plateau and not trying to trip over stones and things like that. And they take me to a door underneath the causeway of near the pyramid, and there's this iron gate, and they give me the key, and they said, "You want to unlock?" And I said, "Sure." And at the top level, there was just kind of like a winch that they must have used to bring things down at one time, and they had strung a light bulb down there, doing these different levels for any access. And the second level was filled with seven niches that were sarcophagus had been. There was only two there. They were open. They looked basalt. They were very big. The covers were ajar, so you could see nothing was in them. But they were so perfectly formed, I knew immediately that I saw in my head that they had brought down, they didn't bring these already finished stones down the shaft, because there's no way they could have done it. They brought the raw materials and put it into a form. It was slower drying, kind of like a cement type of procedure, and formed them down there. And I found out some of those stones in the pyramid the same way, because you sometimes find fingernails or human hair in the rock, and that doesn't happen naturally, you know. So so anyway, there was two, and I saw these, and I said, oh, I wonder if these are for the seven gods of the underworld. You're having to go through tests before you can get on that solar boat that goes to the next world. And of course, the ancient Egyptians were all about the death process. It was very, very
Yes.
important traveling.
Mummified. Yep.
Yes. And so when I got down to the third level, there was, we could see there was, looked like a sarcophagus in the water. We just saw the lid, and the water was kind of had a film on it, so you really couldn't see outside the lid. I asked the guy, the Giza Plateau guy, have they ever opened it? And he said no. And I took water samples. I was prepared to take water samples. I didn't tell them I was going to do this. I knew a lab in near Pasadena, California. Is it Pasadena, Irvine, one of those? And they were sterile bottles. So I took of the water, and it showed that there was a higher degree of salinity in that water that it shouldn't be, because if it was feeding from the Nile is fresh water, and the Nile is now 5 miles away. After the Aswan Dam, they moved things, and the Mediterranean is, a bit of ways away. And so what is this water feeding from? And so, I started to discover that there's water tunnels under a lot of the pyramids in the world. There's under Teotihuacan in Mexico. Cozumel has almost a lake under it. The Bosnian period pyramids have some water tunnels, and Mercury. And Mercury is like one of the sulfur, salt, and mercury are like the alchemist tool back in Egyptian time. So I realized they needed water for whatever they were doing, whether it was used as a power plant, whether it was used for initiation. I think it's been used for lots of different things over time. And of course, it was used as an ascension chamber. And what I was shown was that during the time of Akhenaten, which I was a high priest during the time of Akhenaten, that doesn't make me anything special or anything, but I was involved in trying to open up the dimensional portals so that you didn't have to die to ascend. And somehow it got corrupted, and all these souls were trapped between dimensions, still trapped until the next ascension period, which is right now. So I incurred karma from that. And Akhenaten incurred karma. He didn't know what was going on either. And later he had to come back as Jesus Christ. So there's a lot of stuff that I was given knowledge of, that information and so forth like that. So this last time when I went, that's why I had to cancel Mira, because I had an Egypt trip. It was just with one other person. It was a special expedition. I was going to spend the night in the Great Pyramid and to do some exploration, but I also had booked to go down back to the water tunnels. Now this time I was prepared. The water comes up along the rung, but I was prepared to go into the water, to submerge and not go under it. I wasn't going to get my face, because I don't want to get any bacteria and stuff like that. But I had kind of like a wetsuit on underneath, which they couldn't see. And my guide was keeping the Giza Plateau guy busy on the next level. So I got in, and with underwater flashlights, I could see. I took video. I could see the whole sarcophagus under there. And most people don't know it was that big, you know. And I got up probably just under my breast area, my chest area here in the water. And at first you wouldn't want to get in, because it's dark down there, and the water is all filled with scum on the surface, because nothing's moving. There's no movement. And it's like dirt and dust and everything else. And so my instincts just told me, move the water. So I was using my legs and my hands, which had gloves on, special gloves on, and moving the water away from me, and it was all clear water underneath. So, I was able to take some really interesting pictures and videos of that sarcophagus under. Now, I've been told by some people that said you're not going to be able to open it anyway. It's it's DNA sealed. It's hermetically sealed. You'd have to have the right DNA to get in, and I doubt if I have the right DNA. Nor would I try to lift a stone like that anyway, and
Yeah.
I'd be land up in the Egyptian jail, I'm sure.
Whose do you think it is? Who do you think it belongs to?
It's a portal to another world, which I actually included in one of my Stax Library Truth books. That it is a portal. It's an opening to another. The Egyptian thing. That's why they built it over this portal. It was they knew what they were doing. And so when I say hermetically sealed, you'd probably have to have the right vibration, the right knowledge, probably from the past, be connected to it to probably open this thing. Otherwise, because I asked them, I thought they didn't try to open it. And they said, no, we couldn't open it. They didn't go into detail about that, and it keeps flooding, that those chamber. And then there's in the back you can see there's another tunnel leading somewhere. I suspect it leads to Hawara. I suspect they did a ceremonial boat journey from Hawara to there. And it was sort of like the river Styx, they're going through the rituals and so forth on to before they can ascend to. I think they started at Hawara, came through the pyramid and the waters, and then went into did the ascension chamber stuff. That's my take on it. Nobody's ever said that, but that's my take on it. That's what I felt was probably going on. I mean, I was there. When I realized that I had been a part of that corruption process, and one time I didn't know some people were trying to keep it from not happening, and we didn't know until it was too late. I just sobbed. I sobbed. And so, I realized that, on some level, there was, we all incur karma from things we done, whether it was done mistakenly, accidentally, or not. So that's what I was working on. And then I found out who had corrupted the process, not who I thought. It was Thoth.
It was who?
Thoth, Thoth, the one that say wrote the emerald tablets and everything. And they said, yeah, he's the one that corrupted the, everybody thinks he's a good guy. No, he wasn't a good guy. So, yeah, yeah. And he declared himself like a god in wisdom because of this power and so forth. So, yeah, you're not going to find this anywhere either. So it was like having to untangle any contracts I had with this being, in this lifetime or past lifetime or any future lifetimes. But I personally know that's why I didn't go through the light in the tunnel. They said, you're not coming back to third dimensional Earth when you leave here. And I kind of always knew this was my last sojourn on third dimensional Earth, And from looking around, it's like a lot of people are with me on that and they're going, what's happened to this dimension? It's gone Looney Tunes. And, we just watch it like, okay, this is a bad sci-fi movie, and don't get wrapped up in it. Don't get too pulled down into the minutia of all the idiocracy. And, that there's many souls, newer souls, who I don't want to say baby souls, but newer souls that haven't had much incarnations in manifestation on third dimensional Earth. And they're experiencing turmoil because that's how they learn in the beginning through emotional and physical turmoil. And they seem to be stirring up a lot of things where some of us who probably have been here around the block a number of times said, yeah, it's time to move on.
Yeah, it makes sense, when you're younger, we or some of us, like the ones you're describing, younger and more arrogant, whereas yes, so that makes sense. So do you think the build out and architecture of Egypt was done by aliens, Kathy?
The Egyptians like to believe that they did it all, which is insane. And anything, you have to be really careful about the religion because if it goes back more than, was it 3 or 4,000 years, it starts stepping on Allah's, the religions things, which that's why all the stuff in the Vatican, this Vatican secret archives, books that deal with history that's either been erased or forgotten and so forth like that. And the Egyptian, there was a pre-Egyptian dynasty. There was the Atlantean dynasty. The Atlantean dynasty was much more. That's why the technology I came. There was a number of Atlantean beings, and we created outposts in different parts of the world. Antarctica was one of them, and we built different pyramids. And there's different pyramids that where we secreted the records, from our time, which some of them haven't been found, but I suspect some of them have been found, and that they're not going to, because that brings up too many other questions and control factors, governmental control factors, lots of things. I mean, we just see alone what our CIA and space program and alien and UFO disclosure. Will we ever get the truth? Probably not. But they'll give us something that to to pacify us for now. But yeah, that's not, because then they have to explain why they kept it hidden from us all these years. When it could have benefited mankind. Oh, because it would have destroyed the economy. The economy would have been bankrupted or something like that. Well, that's not necessarily true. So, yeah, it's uh, so they forget about the pre-Atlantean, and there was civilizations before the Atlantean too. We're reincarnated from some of those prior civilizations, and just remembering. A lot of our tech people are redoing it over again. I saw as clear as could be. I remember Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey had even said, the pyramids go back more than 12,000 years, and the Sphinx was even like 15,000 or something like that. Of course, no Egyptian will admit to that with unless they wink, and and I saw. I mean, Casey had always talked about that the Hall of Records, which you know they say it's under, what is it, the left paw or so, for the whatever, the left, right, depends on which way you're looking at, direction, under the Sphinx. Well, there's a whole like platform under the Sphinx that hasn't been uncovered. It's just up the Sphinx's feet. And it goes down. I've been in a tunnel underneath the Sphinx, not the one that I went to, when I first did my out of body thing. But I went down into it's back on the rump of the Sphinx, so I call it the ass of the Sphinx. And I went down there, and about 6 feet down, it wasn't that deep, and about 6 feet ahead of me, that those tunnels were plugged. Now, it might have been because, for structural, because that Sphinx doesn't look like anything it did years ago, and it's had more cosmetic surgery, and sometimes they've done it from. I've got pictures of the Sphinx from the Library of Congress, and it kind of almost looks like a snake. It's been so eroded from water erosion over the years, which could have been a time before the Egyptians. If you talk to geologists during the age of Leo, with great floods, because nothing else would have accounted for it. It's got water erosion, not wind erosion, water erosion, and so they block off anything that looks like it's getting too close to revealing a truth about their either religion or their history or something like that. Archaeologists for years have been complaining that they discover something, then the site is closed down, locked down. They can't say anything, or they're barred from getting in. 6 months later, Zawi Hawass or so discovers it himself and claims, but maybe with only a portion of the truth. So, maybe, once the gatekeepers are gone from this world, maybe things will start to, the truth will start to surface. But I always call it, this is the age of truth and discernment. This is what we're living through now. And we're having an explosion of truth coming out. It's coming out in little dribs and drabs, but it is still coming out. It's hard to suppress that. It's like somebody who's got psychopathology and they buried a trauma. It's going to wiggle its way to the surface one way or another.
I hope so, Kathy, Dr. Forty. Um, this has been quite a fascinating conversation. What feels most important to share that we haven't touched on already?
Um, Follow your true self, follow your true, your inner calling and what, you're supposed to do. Don't listen and don't compare yourself to how others have done or so forth like that. You may have done that in a past life for all you know. Doesn't mean you have to repeat it in this lifetime. And as my brother said, it's just an illusion. Don't get sucked down into the emotional components of it. Watch it like a movie and just tell your friends, pass the popcorn.
I love
So,
that. I have three
yes.
questions I ask everyone. What brings you joy and laughter these days?
My friends, I found my tribe here in Maui. I mean, they're all very spiritually oriented women, healers, and we can talk about these things.
What would you tell young Kathy who's about to embark on this wonderful journey of life?
Oh, it's going to be a hell of a trip, Kathy. You're going to love it. I look back at my life and say, I got to do so many things other people didn't do. And, I had a sibling once tell me, they go, we wish we were more like you. You're a risk taker. A lot of times we go for what's safe and known. And there are times, I mean, I don't take outrageous risks like jumping off cliffs or anything like that, calculated risks. And they've usually turned off because I've trusted in the process that I'm being guided to do certain things. And so, yeah, young Kathy would not have known that, she, started off thinking she was going to be in the theater world or in the journalism world. I worked for CBS News in New York. And then she turned into a therapist. Now she's turned into a sci-fi writer. So who would have known? Keep reinventing yourself so you don't become dull.
I love that. What final message or blessing do you have for those listening?
Oh, um, don't think you know it all. It's sort of like when you start making plans, the world laughs, as they say. And just be open. I mean, not so open that your brain falls out, but be open to all different ways of thought. I mean, I would never have been the therapist I wasn't if I hadn't had those clients, those, who had all these alter personalities. I learned more from them than I would have learned in graduate school. They don't teach you these things. Life teaches you. Let life be your leader and your to teach you the experience you need. Don't hole up in your house, and waiting to die or something like that. Go out there and even if it's just in nature, nature talks to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Forty, for spending
Thank
this
you.
time with me, and I hope everyone enjoys this as much as I did.
Thank you, Mira.